of removing from the Bible anything. It is those who would say, oh, the Psalms contain it all, suggesting that perhaps we don't need the rest of it. And all the words of Christ is all the Scriptures. He does not restrict the word of Christ to these particular departments, but rather intimates that all our communication should be adopted to edification, that even those which tend to hilarity may have no empty savour. Leave to unbelievers that foolish delight which they take from ludicrous and frivolous jests and witticisms, and let your communications not merely those that are grave, but those also that are joyful and exhilarating contain something profitable. In the place of their, meaning the world, obscene or at least barely modest and decent songs, it becomes you to make use of hymns and songs that sound from God's praise, sound forth God's praise. Further, under these three terms, he, again, this is Paul, he includes all kinds of songs. They are commonly distinguished in this way, that a psalm is that in the singing of which some musical instrument beside the tongue is made use of. A hymn is properly a song of praise, whether it be sung simply with a voice or otherwise, while an ode or spiritual song contains not merely praises but exhortations and other matters. He would have the songs of Christians, however, to be spiritual, not made up of frivolities and worthless trifles, but for this has a connection with his argument. End of quotation. Mr. Stewart said that the word spiritual there referred to the fact that psalms are inspired by the Holy Ghost. I don't believe that he's right when he says that. But rather, Paul is telling us that our songs should be spiritual. He's speaking of their nature, their character. There's no such thing as an unspiritual psalm. There's no such thing as a psalm that isn't spiritual. So he doesn't need to use this word spiritual if he's talking about psalms only. But because he's not talking about psalms only and talking about songs that we may employ in worship, he uses the word spiritual to show just exactly the nature of that which is to be sung unto the Lord. Singing in your heart. I take up the quotation again. This relates to disposition. For as we ought to stir up others, so we ought also to sing from the heart, that there may not be merely an external sound with the mouth. At the same time, we must not understand it as though he would have everyone sing inward to himself, but he would have both conjoined, provided the heart goes before the tongue. That's the end of Calvin's quotation. And I want you to note that what Calvin has to say on Colossians 3:16 and Ephesians 5:19 is certainly not the exposition of one who is an exclusive singer of psalms. He rather simply distinguishes the psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs into psalms, songs sung to a musical instrument, hymns, any and all songs of praise, and songs or odes, songs containing both praise and other matter, for example, exhortation. Thus I learn from John Calvin on this particular matter, and I accept his exegesis. And I'm happy to be in the same camp as John Calvin this evening. I am not those proclaiming the doctrine of psalms only, here tonight are in step with the great reformer. Furthermore, what John Calvin says here, he demonstrated for us in his practice. In 1542 there was printed at Geneva by Calvin that which became the standard Geneva Psalter, containing 30 psalms, the Lord's Prayer, the Creed, and 5 psalms with the Song of Simeon and the 10 Commandments by John Calvin himself. And they sung these. They sung the 10 Commandments. They sung the Song of Simeon. They sung the Creed. Is that the actions of a Psalms only advocate? When the Geneva Psalter of 1543, Calvin's poetical versions no longer appear. In the edition of 1551, there was included 34 compositions by Beza. 47 new melodies were added to the psalm. After a number of editions with minor variations, the work appeared in final form at Geneva and Paris in 1562. And this final form contained the whole Psalter with 150 tunes or melodies, the Decalogue, the 10 Commandments, the Song of Simeon, 2 forms of grace, the Lord's Prayer, and the Creed. John Calvin was not a Psalms-only man. Calvin's position then, as demonstrated in his expositions and demonstrated in his practice, was that he accepted all suitable scriptural passages as vehicles of sung praise, including the Song of Simeon, Luke 2, 29 to 32, the 10 Commandments, the Lord's Prayer, even the Apostles' Creed. But within his framework of praise, it has to be said that he sanctioned David's Psalms as the jewel in the liturgical crown in Geneva. I don't disagree with that at all. He highly rated. He placed the Psalms before all, but he didn't place them on their own. And that's the important thing for us to notice here this evening. Was Geneva's hymnal then in keeping with Psalms only? No, sir, it wasn't. But what about others, such as John Knox? Did he differ with John Calvin on this matter? We have comments on Colossians chapter 3 and the verse 16, which, if John Knox did not write them, he certainly agreed with them in the notes in the Geneva Bible. I have an edition of the Geneva Bible here, borrowed. I'm not even going to open it because it's so valuable. I don't want to be charged with doing it any damage. There's a lot of money involved in that particular volume. It's a very rare book coming to us from that glorious time and from that glorious city, and carrying the testimony of men like Calvin and Knox as to what they believe on the very subject that is before us tonight. Here's what one admirer of the Geneva Bible wrote. The greatest distinction of the Geneva Bible is the extensive collection of marginal notes that it contains. Prominent Reformation leaders such as John Calvin, John Knox, Miles Cloverdale, William Whittingham, Theodore Beza, and Anthony Gilby wrote the majority of these notes in order to explain and interpret the Scriptures. The notes comprise nearly 300,000 words, or nearly 1/3 of the length of the Bible itself, and they are justifiably considered the most complete source of Protestant religious thought available.
Thank you, Mr. Foster. That was 29 minutes and 58 seconds. So I now invite Reverend